Welcome, Pat.
Thank you.
And apologies to everyone who's been waiting.
Technical issues.
Welcome and thank you for participating. Yeah, they happen more than we want right now. Welcome and thank you for participating in today's CPYB e-seminar, Canada and US Cross-Border Transactions, moderated by Pat Sturgeon. I am Jeanette with CPYB and I will be your host today. I'd like to review a few items before we get started. Be sure to stay on for the entire presentation to receive your CPYB recertification credit. If you are calling in today, be sure to email me at info@cpyb.net with your phone number so we can provide you credit for your participation. And finally, if you have a comment or question, please type it into either the chat box or the Q&A box in the lower menu bar on your computer screen. Before we formally start the program, we would like to acknowledge the many organizations who provide financial and in-kind support for the CPYB program. We always welcome support from our member and affiliate organizations to help advance promotion of the program within the industry and direct to consumer. Today's webinar is sponsored by Boating Ontario, one of the 7 partner associations providing oversight for the CPYB program. Boating Ontario proudly represents over 500 member companies throughout the province of Ontario. The association provides a foundation to support and grow the recreational boating lifestyle while protecting the environment and enhancing sustainability of its members. Our presenter today is Pat Sturgeon. Pat's passion for boats started when he built his first boat at the age of 16. His professional career started in 1978, where he worked for Hughes Columbia and then CS Yachts. He later branched out on his own to become a yacht broker. Pat's knowledge and enthusiasm have made him a trusted advisor to many on buying and or selling their boat. Pat, we'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Jeanette. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the technical glitch. I'm going to blame it on the weather and COVID. It's probably better to hit them both at once. I'd like to begin by talking about dealing with boat deals across borders and even across oceans. Right now, we're dealing with a lot of restrictions, and I want to talk about how we can overcome some of these restrictions. The first one is travel. Right now, the Canadian-US border is shut to all people back and forth. It's easy enough for a Canadian perhaps to get into the USA, but very difficult for an American to come up to Canada. Lately, we've done about 6 or 7 deals with boats up in Canada sent into the USA, and no one's been able to look at these boats. That's just the way it is. Sorry about that, I can mute it. So anyway, the biggest challenge that we're having, oh gosh, I'm almost myself in the office today, sorry about that, is being able to see these boats, because there's no way we can go there, so we need to have people look at them for us. One of the best things is a surveyor, I would think is the best way to go. Oops, let me just shut all this off. Okay. So what we've had on a couple of occasions is we've asked either a person that you know down there, we call it viewing by proxy, where we ask someone, hey, could you mind looking at this boat for me? If you feel that the other broker, when they go on, if you're dealing with another broker, if they go on board the boat with a video camera, FaceTime, Skype. So what we've been trying to do is get people to look at these boats on the buyer's behalf. Now, if the boat is in the USA and a Canadian wants to go look at it, they will probably have to go with, try to keep my thought on tracks here. Basically, we find if you go to the USA, you're going to have to quarantine when you come back for maybe 3 days, self-testing, all that sort of stuff. So people are really a bit loath to go down to even look at a boat in the US. So we've got to rely on someone else to help us along. Now, the interesting thing is talking about shipping and delivery, that's not quite as difficult because right now all the commercial truckers can go across the border, they can pick boats up. There was a time that now professional delivery skippers can bring boats back. And one of the thoughts that I always had is that if you've got a position where a trucker can take a boat across the border, we did a deal where we had the truck, the person who was buying this boat was not going to buy this boat unless he could put eyes on it. So we did all of our due diligence, surveys, walkthroughs, as much information as possible, and then loaded it on a truck, took it across the border, and then asked him if he would mind paying. If he doesn't want the boat, he would have to pay to put it back where it was. But if he wanted the boat, he could look at it on the truck and he could keep going. And the return cost was going to be anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000. So if the boat's valuable enough and the guy wants it enough, it's probably worthwhile doing that. So that's another sort of way around being able to get people to look at the boat. As I mentioned, there is some other things to discuss too. I have here on my notes, bonded or not. We're running into a situation, sort of leapfrogging a little bit into, and I know, Jeanette, I'm going to sort of slide slightly down here to some of the duties and taxation, but I'm going to come back to it, is we're running into a situation where if there is a free trade between Canada and Europe, and there is free trade between Canada and the USA. So when people ask about duties and taxes, I have to sort of explain to them that if the boat was built in Europe, and you want to get it here and it touches in the USA, you either have to bond it or you'll have to pay 9.5% duty. So a lot of times people are under the illusion and the tricky one are the French boats, the Beneteaus and Jeannots, a lot of them are built in France, residing in the USA. So we have to tippy-toe through that. So where I was going with that was that if you could bond the boat, if it's coming from Europe through, then you can bring it in without having to pay taxes and or duties, not taxes. Anyway, I'm sorry, Jeanette, I'm going to go back up a little bit. Just to mention about yard closures. We're finding up here with COVID, a lot of the yards just will not allow people in to look at boats, even though we deal with all the laws at the time. They're changing constantly. So make sure that if you are going to have someone look at a boat, that they can actually get into the yard. I know some of the northern US states with weather and things like that, they shut it down and throw away the key. So we've been running into a situation where we're trying to get access to boats. And because primarily up here with COVID, there's a number of yards that say, I'm sorry, the lock's on the gate until further notice. So that's something to consider. Now, I am going to pop into, I'm sorry for jumping around here, Janet. Documented foreign or not, licensed, documented, and foreign flagged. As CPYBs, we all know that this can be a real can of worms, foreign flagged vessels. We find a lot of people up in Canada are trying to say, well, we won't have any duty or issues depending on the registration or flagging of a boat. And I say, no, that's not true. Duties are based on where a boat is built, not what flag it has, at least in Canada. Now, I know there's a law in the US that you're not allowed to sell a foreign flag vessel to an American if that vessel's in the USA. So there are a couple of workarounds there, but typically these deals have to happen on the soil where it's legal to do so. I don't really differentiate that much between licensed and documented boats when it comes to the clients being able to buy a boat in the USA. A lot of people are under the illusion up here in Canada anyway, that if it's documented, the government will never know and you won't have to pay any taxes. Or if it's licensed, they're going to know, but that's not the case. The government will check out where the boat's built, if it's come in, and they'll want to see a bill of sale and apply their taxes and duties accordingly. So I do recommend using a documentation expert when I'm doing a US deal. I find they will provide the peace of mind that the boat is free and clear of all titles. Also lead everyone through the documents they're going to need, deletions of registry, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely recommend that. Or in my case, I call my good friend Mary Egloff at RCR Yachts, and I pick her brains or anybody else that I can about dealing with tricky licenses or documented boats that are on the other side of the border. And vice versa. I get calls a lot of times from people in the US, even in Europe, about Transport Canada documented boats. And everything changes all the time, but it's really important to keep on top of it at the time. I always recommend talking to someone in the government to try to get the straight goods. All right, now I mentioned briefly moving to duties and taxation here. I mentioned briefly about the fact that someone's got to pay something. Everyone tries to think of a loophole. And one of the most common loopholes I've always heard is that if a Canadian is buying a US boat and I tell them, I'm sorry, it was built in France, it's going to attract 9.5% duty, you're going to have to pay HST on top of the duty. And they all think, well, what happens if I leave it in Buffalo or leave it in Rochester or leave it in Niagara-on-the-Lake or whatever, and I just sail it out of the US? And the answer to that question is the moment that vessel touches soil in Canada, you have to call into customs, obviously, and say, hey, we're here, we're checking in, otherwise you get thrown in jail. And the moment they find out that that vessel is not a landed vessel, no taxes or duty, anything hasn't been paid, they're going to ask you to turn around and leave immediately. A lot of people are under the illusion that they can have their boats up here under cruising permits. An American can come up here with a vessel and operate under a cruising permit and cruise around in these waters. But a Canadian cannot show up in Canada with a US boat and operate up here without paying his taxes and duties if applicable. So a lot of people try these loopholes. Now, there are a number of boats. I know people just put their head in the sand, show up, they register the vessel as a Canadian registered vessel. You can do that even though the vessel's not lying in Canada. But if you're a Canadian citizen, you want to register the vessel in Canada, you can do that. And the odd person might try to come in with Canada written or the flag hailing port on the back of the boat and just not say anything. And they're probably taking one heck of a chance of losing the boat and some pretty heavy fines or jail. As far as going into the US, a lot of people also have to keep in mind that you just can't keep a boat anywhere you want in the US. You need to get permits and either pay taxes in that particular state. It gets a little tricky. I do get people calling all the time saying, I want to keep my vessel in the US. I'm a Canadian citizen. I don't want to pay any taxes. And there's a timeline depending on the state's rules. So check on the rules of each state so that you know just how long that boat could sit there before someone's coming knocking on your door for taxes. I was mentioned here that we do have different taxes in different provinces. I know a lot of people there are Americans that I'm talking to, so this might bore you a little bit. But Ontario tax is different than Quebec tax, and BC tax is different than Ontario tax. So if you are talking to anyone about the different taxes, you got to find out what's going on in each province. Right now, it's a HST component in Ontario if the vessel's owned by an HST registrant. If the vessel's owned by a non-HST registrant, just a regular brokerage deal or on a boat where the person isn't an HST registrant, then retail sales tax will apply. It's the same amount, but it's self-assessed. So I don't collect any tax from this person, but eventually they'll get a letter in the mail in 2 months or 2 years or 3 years saying, hey, we see you bought a boat, please send us the 13% retail sales tax. Also, things change in Quebec. Quebec has QST, BC has GST and the provincial tax. So everything is different. And then same with the US states. I had someone call me yesterday saying that, not yesterday, but last week, saying that if the boat's registered in Delaware, can they hang out anywhere else in the US and not pay tax? And I was understanding that a lot of people would have their vessels registered out of Delaware, but sail in Maryland or whatever. And I thought that the state put a stop to that. And basically, it's where you keep your boat, not where it's registered, that could attract taxation. Things get a little bit dicey when you're dealing with Europe. I've done a few deals over in England and Croatia and Greece. And again, you've got to watch the VAT that's over there, which is anywhere from 24 to 27%. And I believe it's 80 days or something like that. Depends again on the country that this boat has to move or they're going to attract VAT tax. So a lot of the tax stuff I recommend getting good advice from local sources, whether it be government or a broker that works in that area, is very familiar with the local tax and duty applications. Okay, so I mentioned here U.S.-Canada free trade. NAFTA's gone, by the way. A lot of people would think that the North American Free Trade Agreement was what we ran for years, and you need a document filled out to bring a boat back and forth across the border. We still have free trade. However, it's just a Canada-U.S. agreement, and it just so happens that vessels, pleasure craft, do not have a duty attached to them. However, forms usually have to be filled out. In the old days, it was a NAFTA form. I believe there's another form that's just come out that needs to be filled. Also, watch the EPA forms. We have to make, they're fairly easy, and most of the boats, a lot of the boats are grandfathered, so it's fairly simple, but those are documents that need to be done. Again, I'm a big fan of customs brokers. I use, if I got a vessel going into the USA from Canada, I'll ask the buyer to use a customs broker. And the brokerage fees aren't that bad. They're anywhere from maybe $400 to $700, depending on the firm you use. And same with vice versa coming up into Canada. I learned the hard way trying to bring boats in back in the early 90s on my own, where I sat in a customs office with all my papers and waited there for hours and was scrutinized. And while I'm sitting there, I'm watching everybody grab the customs broker's sheets and run through those and rubber stamp all their stuff in. And I realized this is crazy. I got to get a customs broker. And that's exactly what happens. The boats just come in and out of the country so seamlessly. Most of the brokers are hooked up with the trucking companies. So definitely a customs broker is the way to go from bringing boats back and forth across the border. Now, there are a few other little resources when I'm dealing with boats, trying to get people to accept what they think they're going to get. And I'm moving here on to how to present resources to help with boats out of the country to buyers. The big thing is the surveys and trying to get the client to be comfortable and trustworthy. I always like to use a CPYB, a broker on a co-brokerage, because they can get it. They come along with a bit of knowledge, and I know that they're going to understand how it all works. I always try to get existing surveys. I don't recommend that the client use it as a purchase survey, but it certainly will help a lot. Video walkthroughs have been very, very common up here. And sometimes if the person's a little paranoid, he could pay a surveyor extra to be the video walkthrough as opposed to the other broker, to make sure they can rip into anything that they think they're worried about. And a lot of times, even on a sea trial, we've had the surveyor go out and do like a sailing sea trial, not just checking the engines and gear, but actually telling the guy on the phone how nice the boat sails, et cetera, so that he's got a good feel, looking at the sails while it's up and sailing. That sort of thing. So if the surveyor is properly presented to the potential buyer, make sure you give them 3 or 4 surveyors to pick from. Certainly check the surveyor's credentials. Make sure the surveyor is recognized by all insurance companies. And that's probably the best bet, is to use a surveyor to help be your eyes. I'm in the middle of a deal right now where the surveyor says, hey, it's a lot of snow and everything on the ground, but for $95 an hour, I'll go and have a look at this boat on behalf of the purchaser. And I think that's cheap money for a person to go and have a look at the boat with a critical eye. And then once he has a look and gives you an idea, then you can engage him or someone else to survey the boat. Now I do have here trucking options. You'll find that don't just assume, I've seen this happen so many times. I think Yacht World will has a feature where you can go on and get quotes for trucking from one point in the USA to another point in Canada or vice versa. Be wary of this. It's usually wrong. Not all truckers are allowed to cross the border, and they also aren't aware that there's a $250 to $300 fee if they're crossing over for the first time. So quite honestly, make sure that whoever you're engaging to truck this boat, and even through even provincially and state to state in Canada and the USA, not all truckers in Ontario are allowed to go to Quebec, etc. So weigh out all the trucking options and make sure they can actually come here. It's getting expensive, but the amount of boats for sale is getting thinner and thinner. I'm having more people from the West Coast ask about bringing a boat over, shipping it out to California, shipping out to Vancouver. And I'll tell you, it's $20,000 to $30,000 if the boat's 40 feet or bigger, and that can add a lot of money to the cost. However, the buyers are stuck; they just don't have the boats to pick from, so they're willing to pay that. So just make sure that when you do talk about trucking, make sure the trucker is able to actually move the boat. Okay. I talked about documentation companies and Vessel Documentation Center, Transport Canada. These are places that you contact to be able to get a hold of, to get the right goods on what paperwork you'll need. Certainly when you're doing liens and checks on boats, it's very important. I do enjoy the documentation companies for that. Okay. Well, I do have a section here. It's called Security Ideas for the Financial Process. This is getting to be more and more of a concern. And I can't believe the number of people or companies that have been stiffed or ripped off for hundreds of thousands of dollars because money's going in the wrong places. We just did a deal with Berthon UK on a boat lying in Tahiti. And we had to transfer 400,000 pounds sterling to the client. And I was very nervous because Berthon apparently had told me that they had a $500,000 misappropriation of funds, and the money actually disappeared a few months prior with another one of their deals. So what I always insist on is that when you get wire or account information, you verbally have to talk to the person that's accepting the funds and double check that those numbers are absolutely correct. It's also been brought to my attention that sometimes just sending $1 as a trial run, it can be a little expensive doing this, and they probably don't like doing it, but it's not a bad idea to send $1 first, make sure it gets to its destination. E-transfers, I'm starting to love e-transfers with COVID. I hate going into the banks nowadays. So I'm telling everybody to e-transfer. Now the problem is e-transferring up in Canada between one Canadian to another Canadian is not a problem. I tried to e-transfer out of my US account to an American, and it wouldn't work. My bank tells me that there is a way to do it, but it's complicated. So I don't think you can e-transfer that easily. But I find with deposits and things like that, not large amounts of money, there's a limit of 3,000. Some people have a 10,000 limit max. But for small deposits and things like that, or even multiple e-transfers, I prefer that than telling people to run around the banks. Wire transfers and potential delays. Everybody has to be aware that you just can't snap your fingers and have money show up in someone's account. And some of the contracts, they try to tighten it up pretty heavily. If you miss the payout date by 1 day, they're going to call the deal null and void and take your deposit money, et cetera. So make sure you've got a bit of a human component there, and you let everyone understand that, hey, I've sent the money. I'll get a confirmation of wire from my bank. And from the time that they've given me this confirmation to the time that the person at the other end says, oh, the money's in my account, it is usually more than a day or two, and sometimes 3 days. And I think you have to bank on that or allow for that. So if you tell someone that you're going to close this deal on Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the person's walking into your office with their certified check, and you're going to try to wire the funds to someone in Florida, I have a funny feeling he's not going to see that money until Tuesday of the following week. So just be prepared for that. Now we are getting a couple of questions coming up, but I'm just going to finish up here, and then we'll maybe put them all together if that helps. So we talked about that. One of the things I was going to discuss here is the keeping up with the travel restrictions. Again, I'm bouncing around a little bit today, but this stuff with the COVID and the quarantining really needs to be planned out. And wherever a boat is, just don't anticipate that it's easy enough for someone to go and look at it and come back. And it costs a lot of money. I know in Canada, you have to quarantine for 3 days at your expense when you come back, and that's $3,000. And other countries have their own rules. So make sure that before you just willy-nilly just jump out of the country and go look at a boat, make sure that you're prepared to put up with the costs and the frustration. COVID testing is getting better and better and more rapid, but still a lot of people are paranoid, and I feel you have to respect everyone's paranoia. I know there are a lot of people out there that think this is all way overdone, and it's not for us to say that a person should put their guard down if they don't want to. So if I have a client that is super paranoid, I will do my best to make sure that they can see the boat. I stay away. We talk on the phone instead of talking close by, whatever works. And also the other people that are very, don't really care. They don't wear a mask. They just show up and they want to kind of give you a hug and a kiss. Well, I always say, hey, I'm really sorry, but I gotta back off and just respect my space and respect theirs. Anyway, I mentioned the cost of isolation, but this border closure thing, to be really honest, I don't think you're going to see the Canada-US border opening up anytime soon. And I'm not talking weeks or months. I think if we see this border open up by June or July, I would be surprised. For the people in the USA, most Canadians are absolutely super paranoid about COVID and really don't want the border to open at all. And so that's going to, and then there are other people that are frustrated, but I'm sorry, I think that you're going to have to start find other ways to think out of the box. The good news is, and this is something I'm noticing, is COVID has really ramped up the people's desire to go boating. So we now have factories at capacity. New boats you can't get new boats until the following 2022 in most cases. Anything that's nice, any boat that's over newer than 2000 vintage or 95 even, seems to be hard to get your hands on. Boats are flying off the shelves. We're starting to see bidding wars. One of my brokers sold a boat today for $2,000 over asking, which is, I found kind of odd for a $20,000 boat, but people are fighting over the boat. So I think we will find a way to be able to keep moving product so long as they allow us to move the boats back and forth across the border. I saw a question came in about a professional delivery captain or skipper. Yes, they seem to be allowing that, but make sure the person does have his documents in order and have them. I always say, make sure that before they deliver the boat, that they're actually recognized and will be allowed back into either country with bringing the boat. But I know the trucking is very easy, but the own skippers and professional crew can be a little bit more complicated. It works, but you want to do a little bit more homework on that. Now, I always say the last part that I want to talk about is interbroker relations and dealing with CPYB brokers to achieve a predictable outcome. I am so happy to be a CPYB and be able to pick up the phone and talk to so many people that I've met over the years. And the moment we discuss the fact that we're CPYB, it is so nice to know. Now, I know I'm not legally allowed to discuss commission splits, according to my friend Vin Petrola from YABA and CAC, but it's something that has to be talked about when you're doing a deal with another broker. There's nothing more frustrating than, you do the deal, you get going, you're about to close this thing, everything's going well, and then one of the brokers steps up and says, I think I'm doing more work than you, I want more. And I think that's just horrible. I think when you decide on a commission up front, whatever the split, then you should stick to it. And if you feel that the other broker's not doing enough work, well, then suck it up and hopefully you'll be okay on the next go around where you're at the other end. but I had a broker show a boat for me, offered to show the boat, no problem, I'll show the boat. It was right outside their office. And then as I present the offer, get the offer accepted, and we already talked about a 50-50 deal, he says, oh, my boss is bugging me because I showed the boat, it should be 60-40 in our favor. And I says, well, no, it's called a courtesy showing. But if you're putting another broker out, and I'm very, very weary of, if I've got a client that wants to have a boat looked at or see a boat, then the guy's got to drive 2 hours. I want to make darn sure that if this thing goes well, this guy's going to buy the boat and they're qualified. So you owe it to the other brokers to qualify your clients ahead of time. I mentioned COVID protocol, whatever is going at the time, whatever the law says, just abide by it. Right now, our office door is locked. We're not allowed to have anyone come in. We are allowed to show boats by appointment only. And that's a little bit of a gray area, but you know, we can, I set the ladders up, I open the boats up, and then I wait for them to look at the boat and then come back later and close things up. I mentioned briefly about courtesy showings within reason. I do not expect a broker to drive 2.5 hours to show someone a boat that they're on their docket that day is 5 other boats to go look at that are different. So, you know, just be wary of the other broker's time. That's something I really am a stickler for. I hate to take advantage of somebody. The types of contracts and the processes for documentation. Everybody has a little bit of different types of ways of doing their documents. Personally, I will roll with whatever the other broker wishes, so long as I feel my client's basic needs are met from a contract perspective. Yacht closer, the YABA forms, individual brokers forms. I just want to make sure that use whatever works for everybody. If everyone's happy with using yacht closer, I know they've created quite a monopoly out there. But the last thing I recommend is to try to take charge and say, no, it's got to go on my form. I personally feel that whoever is the selling broker that's presenting the offers, I feel he should control the contracts. And unless, of course, the other brokerage houses have strict rules. I know there are some that have very strict rules, will only use yacht closer, will only use a YABA form. Well, I'm not going to stop a person's potential purchase by saying no. The other thing that I'm also need to let everyone know is when it comes to the deposits. I've had a couple of situations, mostly in Europe. I will tell everyone right now, if you've ever done a deal over in Europe, have your guard up all the time. It is the Wild West over there. And a number of times the brokers will want to share the deposit. They simply say, give me my half of the deposit to hold on to. And you just know there's a red light there. You say, no, the deposit is simply funds held in escrow, and it's held in earnest. It's held in good faith that we're going to proceed to the next steps of the contract. So do not give the deposits or have control of deposits given to the listing broker. It's the selling broker, the person that's doing the deal, that has to control the funds. And otherwise, you're going to find a lot of times money can be a little hard to retrieve. Basically, holdbacks and late closures due to weather. It's just getting worse and worse every year. The surveyors are not coming out of their holes until it's nice and sunny out and warm. I'm having a real hard time trying to hold deals together with this cold weather and the late the pushing these closings out later and later. I try to ask, and how I do it is I go to my purchaser and I say, how would it if you put the shoe on the other foot and you were selling a boat and you asked someone to take their boat off the market until you can have a nice sea trial on the boat in May? With power boats, I feel a sea trial is very important, and because you're dealing with the engines, and the engines are the major component of the boat, with or cost of the boat. With sailboats, I think you can get away with a healthy holdback, close the deal, and upon spring, make sure everybody gets together, put the boat together, and then finalize the rest of the holdback clauses and conditions. I feel that taking a boat off the market just isn't fair for the sellers because somebody needs to go for a sail ride in June. Anyway, you have to sort of muddle through that yourself and make sure everybody's happy. The last thing here is interim insurance issues. Everybody, I'm finding insurance is getting trickier and trickier now with boats out of your country. We're in the middle of one right now where a boat's down in North Carolina. We've closed the deal. The person's called up as insurer, say, hey, I need you to insure this boat. I'm bringing it back to Canada. And they had a heck of a time trying to find an underwriter that would give them insurance for a boat in North Carolina. The problem is, Mother Nature is getting worse and worse, and the insurance companies are taking huge hits on hurricanes and things like that. Also, they don't want boats, are they in the water, are they out of the water? What kind of insurance do you want? I mean, in this case, the boat's coming out of the water next week and going to be trucked back. We had to beg and plead with the insurance company to cover him until he gets out of the water. They were fine if it got loaded on a truck and was on land, but with it sitting in the water, they were worried. So don't assume that everybody can get insurance fairly easily on boats that you're bringing in back and forth out of the country. And the other thing that everybody forgets is that you can't insure something you don't own. So time and time again, we'll get a client who'll say, well, the seller is going to keep his insurance on the boat until I pick it up. Meanwhile, you bought and paid for the boat a month prior. And I say, listen, if the insurance company finds out that that person never owned the boat, then they have no obligation to insure it. So don't think that you can pass, insurance is not transferable in any way. So you can't have that. There is a little, sometimes as a loophole would be to make sure that they've got somehow some financial vested interest, which would be a partial payment on the boat and the major portion outstanding or something like that to have their insurance. So don't assume that they can insure the boat for you. Anyway, there's a number of questions. I'm going to sign off on that. I hope I didn't destroy everybody's timing here, being late and phones ringing and all that stuff, but welcome to my life. Questions? I'm just pulling some up here.
Great.
What is HSP?
I'll feed them to you.
Okay, that's fine.
And you might have answered a couple of these. What is the current estimate for the end of the travel ban for USA to Canada?
Well, this isn't official because I'm not a politician, but I would not think that we're going to get, we're going to see June maybe before they talk about opening the border. At least that's my opinion. And talking to most Canadians, I think they're all going to agree to it.
And you already answered about the professional boat captain, right? Yes.
Check to make sure. I think initially when COVID first came out, professional boat captains weren't cutting it. You could not use them. I found Steve McPherson from Navy Point Marine was doing a lot of movement of boats with professional captains. Sometimes you call around and talk to these guys and they'll tell you the preferred border where the captains are getting less grief or not at the border. So, but yeah, professional captains are allowed.
And a statement, oh, hi, Vin. YABA as a written courtesy showing protocol.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Vin wrote YABA as a written courtesy showing protocol. Courtesy showing protocol?
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. The courtesy and YABA has it in their forms.
Okay. Can you suggest good U.S. Great Lakes ports of entry, or is one better than another?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the person I always ask for that is my good old customs broker, Joe Bailey from White and White, because I brought boats in at every U.S. point you can imagine, or Canadian point you can imagine coming up from the U.S. And when I call him, he says, where's he entering? And depending on what I tell him, he rolls his eyes and says, oh boy, those guys are tough or they're clowns or whatever. So I know Alexander Bay or Alexander Bridge up in Canada, up by Kingston area is a tough one. Toronto's pretty easy. Hamilton's pretty easy. Certainly down in Sarnia, it's pretty good. But I would call the broker and say, where do you want me to take this boat? Because the customs broker is the guy that knows all these people.
Okay, so I'm going to read this question and then there's a follow-up from Stephen. What is HST and QST? And then he follows up with FYI, Canada has announced no cruise ships, i.e. Alaska trade, until May 2022. This has Jones Act implications, and cruise lines are asking for waivers.
I don't think I could answer that question at all, but I'd call the cruise line. But personally, we're not getting a lot of people interested in going on a cruise ship. But yeah, I agree. I think that would have implications with the Jones Act. But I think this pandemic is superseding any written rules. They're just saying, hey, it's almost well, they could declare a state of emergency, and when they declare that, they can do whatever they want. The first question: what is HST and what is QST? I'll answer that fairly quickly. HST is a harmonized sales tax, which is a federal tax, which is a combination of provincial and federal tax, but the federal government collects it. QST is Quebec sales tax, and that's a combination of GST, which is a federal tax, and QST, which is a provincial tax. One is 9%, one's 5%. Quebec has a very interesting law, and I always try to not tell too many people about this, but everybody's going to hear it now anyway, is that if you live in the province of Quebec and buy a used boat that's owned by a non-HST registrant, a brokerage deal, typically, there's no tax. But if you go to Ontario and buy that boat and bring it into Quebec, you've got to pay 9% QST. So there's a 9% tax for a Quebecer buying a boat in Ontario. A lot of times people stick their heads in the sand and hope they don't get caught. Anyway, another question?
There's two here together from Kevin. Who do you use in the US to assist with documentation? Who do you use here in Canada for documentation licensing?
Good question, Kevin. There's a number of people in the US I use. I've got them in my computer. One of them is, oh gosh, I'm going to draw some blanks on these names already. There's, I think, Monroe Document Agency. There's about 3 of them that I use. But you know what? If you're doing a deal down there and you ask the other broker that's involved who they use for, who's a good recommended documentation company, they'll probably give you some. Oh, the one that's on the tip of my tongue actually helped us with our exam questions on documentation, but her name escapes me. But Kevin, I can get you that after I'm finished the webinar. As far as in Canada, I use, well, my office manager, Heather Moore, does a great job, and she's learning more and more. But in Canada, documentation's a little more straightforward. If you call Transport Canada and talk to the folks up there, we do all our own documentation here in the office for Canadian boats. I don't find it as complicated. I shouldn't say complicated. I find it easy because I'm in Canada. My biggest concern on the documentation is probably liens and hidden liens. Just a general rule of thumb, most boats in the US, and this is definitely nothing bad to say about our American friends, but most boats in the US do have financing on them. Whereas a lot of the boats in Canada, financing is a little bit of a taboo thing, so there's not as many. But regardless of the person's financial well-being, it's much cheaper and more attractive for an American to borrow money on a boat. So the reason I use a documentation expert down there is to make sure it's free and clear.
Since you were just talking about financing, let me follow up with this one. I have a Canadian client who wants to be paid before his boat leaves Ontario. The US lenders are not funding on boats out of the country. The seller has suggested they want a letter of credit from the buyer's bank. Have you run across this?
Yes, twice. And I lost the deal on that. And I think I was not happy with my seller at the time, who just refused to relinquish his documentation. So what it is the US banks want to be able to have the documentation on the boat. And I come a little bit from the old school, is that possession is 9/10 of the law. So where I had advised my client, because this guy was buying the boat and he was not going to get any money from the bank unless they held the ship's registry. And the seller said, no way I'm giving my ship's registry up. Now, Ships registry, it's kind of a dodgy piece of paper for some people, and the banks think makes them feel good. But I just said, you know what? On the second time around, I said, listen, if you want to sell your boat, they need to get their money. You got to sign the registry. And if the money doesn't come and you're going across the border, you just don't let the boat out of the yard. Simple as that. Because if funds don't change hands, then in my view, and I got to watch when I say my view, the contracts are null and void because no money is changing. Once the money changes hands, then you're fine. So I would not, but it is tough. And again, respect other people's wishes. If they don't want to let the boat go without seeing all the money, and they don't want to let their documents go, that's a tough one. Sometimes an interim lawyer, some kind of a trust could be set up. That might be the solution to it. Next question.
Why $3,000 to quarantine? Does the government charge that fee?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, it's common in a few other countries as well. The government really doesn't want anybody to go. The Canadian government doesn't want anyone to leave this country or leave their house, for that matter, to go anywhere for almost any reason. So they want to make it as difficult as possible. So when you come back into the country, you have to quarantine. And this just came out about, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, where you have to quarantine for 3 days. And I think it was $2,800 to $3,000. My daughter lives in New Zealand. New Zealand has the exact same law. If you want to go into New Zealand, you've got to quarantine and it's $3,000 and you're paying the bill and it's the government that sets you up. So I can't answer why. It is. They just want to deter people from going anywhere.
Okay.
Next question.
In the PNW, we have been told the border will be this is a comment. We have been told the border will be closed until March 1st, 2022. Wow. Yeah, wow. I don't know if I can comment on that. I just know that it's going to be a while. I don't know. It depends. This variant has got everybody worked up now. The vaccines, people we're charging towards the vaccine. All I can say is that could be the case, and governments change their minds. If all of a sudden we kick this COVID in the butt and we're in good shape, they'll probably open the border up. But right now, I don't doubt it. I really don't doubt it. Anyway, next question. Do we need to undocument the vessel in the US before sending to Canada?
Yes, you should. You should. Now, there's always a transition in paperwork. So once the funds have changed hands, then you need to delete the document, delete the registry in either country.
Okay, and we have one more question. If you have a question, I see we have more in chat. So let me finish this question and then we'll go back to the chat. Would it be an opportunity for a hired commercial captain to run a boat to the US for an inspection and then return to California? Or Canada.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure. Whatever works. I can see this being, it's actually a pretty cool idea. I actually agree with this idea. Depends on the boat and the situation. I know here in Toronto, we have a lot of boats in between Toronto and the greater GTA, and then also Rochester, Buffalo, all on the other side of the lake. And if it's a matter of a professional captain, now it would be interesting to check if a professional captain is delivering the boat on a sort of a no return basis. In other words, when they get there, they've got to show export documents versus I'm a captain that's professional captain bringing the boat over for someone to have a look. I would check that out first, but I love the idea. Next question.
All right, let me go back over to chat. Let's see. To all fellow CPYBs, Andy Niffen, CPYB, IYBA with AK Yachts here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I am available and willing to act as your proxy broker, as selling broker here in Florida. If you are interested in that, I can provide you with more information.
Great. Sounds like we're getting some entrepreneurial action here.
Yeah, so that was the last of the questions. Do we have any additional questions for Pat while we have him? We are running out of boats in the US. Do you have any to spare?
No, we're all out up here. And if there's one thing I've noticed in the last year is whatever you think is going on in your backyard, if you're an American or a Canadian, is a good chance the same thing's happening in their backyard. We're all out of boats up here. I'm sorry, we're flush out. We're hoping you guys could come up with some. And everybody thinks, I've had some cocky clients saying, oh, well, in 5 years when all this is over, we're going to be flooded with boats. Well, I don't know, but right now, finding good boats is the toughest thing. And that person who chatted wanting to be a proxy, I actually feel that that's a great idea. If you could somehow credential yourself up and put yourself as the key is to be very neutral, not a broker or not well, you can be a surveyor, but I wouldn't want to say you're a yacht broker and you're also looking at boats to tell people to buy them. But I really feel that that's going to be the answer dealing with this pandemic, is having people look at boats for you and be very honest with you and help you get through the buying process.
All right, that's the end of our questions. We would like to thank Pat. Again, we apologize for the technical difficulties that we had at the beginning of the webinar, but thank you for your patience while we got through it. Reminder that if you called in today, email info@cpyb.net and we'll make sure you get your credits for today. And one last comment from Kevin. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Kevin. I know Kevin well, and we're going to solve as many problems as we can together, because he's going to be taking over my position on the CAC. So I look forward to seeing a nice, smooth transition.
Oh, and since you mentioned that, we do want to thank Pat. If you hadn't seen, Pat will be retiring, so we appreciate Pat and thank him for his volunteer efforts. And David, you just said, I only need you to email if you were calling in. If you logged in via computer, you don't need to do anything. You're good to go. And let's see, Larry says we're going to miss you on the CAC, Pat.
Thanks, Larry. I'll be at the end of the phone anytime.
Let's see, we got some more comments rolling in. Thank you, informative. So thank you again, Pat, and good luck with your retirement.
Well, I'm still working my buns off selling boats. I'm just retiring from the volunteer stuff. I need a break. I paid my dues.
Excellent.
Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.